Hey there. Tonight, we step quietly into the dim glow of a medieval healer's chamber. A small room thick with the scent of dried herbs and curling wisps of incense smoke. Imagine yourself standing there, surrounded by jars of crushed roots and faded parchments. The flicker of candlelight casting dancing shadows on rough stone walls. Your doctor here is no mere man of science. He's part herbalist, part mystic, part wizard, woven deeply into a world where magic and medicine dance a delicate, inseparable waltz. You hear the hushed murmurs of whispered prayers and incantations blending with the rustle of vellum and the clinking of glass bottles. In this world, sickness isn't just something biological. It's a punishment, a curse, a battle of unseen forces. Healing means not only applying salves and poultices, but also invoking unseen powers, chanting spells, drawing symbols, and carrying charms to ward off evil. The air is thick with mystery, and you can almost taste the tension between the physical and the supernatural. Your senses pick up on the faint aroma of mugwort and sage, the soft crackling of burning resin, and the slight chill when the healer reaches for a talisman, rumored to hold ancient power. But as you stand there, breathing it all in, a question lingers. What if this magic is only a part of a much larger picture? A piece in the puzzle of how medieval medicine slowly, cautiously, began to shift towards reason. Before we delve deeper into this world where science and superstition were intertwined, take a moment to like and subscribe if you enjoy these journeys through time. Share in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who joins us in these quiet explorations. Now, settle in. Let the candlelight soften your edges and prepare to step further into the curious world of medieval medicine, where magic and reality meet, and every ailment carries a story. So, what if magic was only one part of the puzzle? Let's pull back the curtain just a little further. You find yourself standing at the edge of a cloistered courtyard, your feet crunching softly over gravel as robed figures pass silently between sun-dappled columns. Their hoods are low, faces hidden in shadow, but their voices carry a steady rhythm of Latin prayers echoing through the air like a heartbeat. It's early morning, and the scent of damp stone mixes with rosemary and candle wax. The bells ring out softly from the chapel tower above, not so much marking the hour as sanctifying it. In this world, time isn't kept by clocks, but by ritual. You walk into the cathedral, where light filters through stained glass in slow-moving beams, illuminating dust like particles of divine intent. The church isn't just a place of worship, it's the beating heart of the medieval worldview. And medicine, it kneels humbly at its feet. You see, in this time, to be ill wasn't simply a misfortune of the body. It was a moral crack, a sign that something in your soul, or the soul of your village, had fallen out of harmony with the heavens. Disease wasn't random, it was sent. Everything from boils to blindness had a spiritual weight to it. Some illnesses were trials to be endured, others punishments to be feared. So it made sense, didn't it, that healing began not with the body, but with the spirit. You kneel, you pray, you confess. Sometimes you fast. And if that didn't work, maybe you try relics, tiny bones or bits of cloth said to carry the grace of saints. You might even drink holy water infused with scripture, or tie a ribbon around your wrist bearing a passage from the Psalms. The line between spiritual healing and physical treatment was not thin. It was non-existent, and the ones who knew this best, the monks. Step inside the scriptorium, and you'll find them hunched over vellum, copying ancient texts by candlelight. Their quills scratch with soft urgency, translating Greek and Arabic medicine through the lens of Christian virtue. Galen and Hippocrates survive here, barely, preserved like pressed flowers between pages thick with theology. You see a young monk squinting at a chart of humours, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, and next to it, a passage from St. Augustine about sin and suffering. For him, these aren't contradictions, they are complements. The body's fluids and the soul's balance must be in alignment. Even surgery, rudimentary and brutal as it was, required divine sanction. Monasteries held their own herb gardens, apothecaries, and infirmaries, but there was always the sense that real healing came from above. The hands of the healer might hold the blade or the salve, but only God could truly guide them. Now imagine you've caught a fever. Your skin is burning, and sweat pours down your back in cold streams. You're ushered into the monastery infirmary, a long, narrow room with wooden beds and linens that smell faintly of vinegar. A monk leans over you, whispering prayers while crushing lavender into a paste. He draws a cross on your forehead, not with ink, but with oil. You're not just being treated, you're being sanctified. But a seed of doubt begins to bloom in your mind. If the soul must be cleansed for the body to heal, what happens when that doesn't work? When the holiest monk can't stop the shaking in your limbs, or the shadow creeping across your lungs? Could there be another force at work? One not found in scripture, but in the soil or the stars? That question lingers, flickering like the last light of a votive candle. And so you ask yourself, is it possible to cure the body without the blessing of heaven? So, is it possible to heal without heaven's blessing? Let's step into the place where that question stops being abstract and starts smelling like boiled wormwood and burnt rosemary. You push open a crooked wooden door. It creaks, soft, slow, like it's trying not to wake something old and powerful asleep inside. The air hits you first. It's thick with the mingled scents of dried mugwort, ground cinnamon, and a biting edge of fresh garlic. The space is dim, but alive. Rows of shelves lean against the walls, each one crowded with tiny bottles sealed in wax, linen bundles tied with red thread, and clay pots marked with curious symbols. It's not just a room, it's a crossroads between natural knowledge and whispered spellcraft. You stand still for a moment, letting your eyes adjust. Somewhere, behind a curtain of tattered wool, you hear the soft rhythmic grind of mortar and pestle. There's a patient seated nearby, twitching fingers gripping a wooden bowl half filled with something that smells sharply of vinegar and nettle. His brow is damp, and the healer leans over him, not with urgency, but with slow, confident care. This is your physician, a man whose belt holds both a knife for lancing boils and a pouch of dried mandrake root. His robe is worn at the hem but embroidered with protective sigils, small and faded. Around his neck hangs not a crucifix, but a charm shaped like an eye, bronze and polished from decades of touch. When he speaks, his voice is low and deliberate, as if each syllable carries both cure and consequence. He adds a pinch of thyme into the steaming bowl, murmuring under his breath. Not in Latin, but in something far older. You catch phrases that sound like prayer, but the cadence is different, earthier, like he's speaking to the herbs themselves, not through them. This isn't chemistry. This is conversation, with nature, with forces he doesn't name aloud. And he's not alone in this belief. Across Europe, healers like him relied on plants, yes, but also symbols, colours, moon phases, and even dreams. Sage for clarity, valerian for sleep, poppy for pain. But to many, those weren't ingredients. They were spirits, helpers, protectors. A sprig of rue wasn't just for fevers. It was a ward against evil. Honey wasn't just a balm. It was a gift from the gods of healing, preserved sunlight in a jar. You notice a series of thin wooden amulets hanging over the window, carved with runes, each tied with flaxen string. One shaped like a crescent moon, another like a tooth. A patient might wear them around the neck or hide them under a mattress, not just to heal, but to prevent the sickness from returning, or worse, spreading. There's always fear, you realize, not just of death, but of the unseen forces that may be pulling its strings. You spot a heavy tome resting on a lectern. It's open to a page smeared with dried petals and ink drawings of the human body. But the organs aren't labeled like in modern diagrams. Instead, each has a corresponding zodiac sign and instructions for bloodletting based on the current position of Mars. To us, it looks like superstition. To them, it was structure, a map of meaning in a terrifyingly random world. And here's the strangest thing. Sometimes it worked. A poultice of yarrow really could reduce inflammation. Garlic might kill parasites. Honey does prevent infection. But for every ounce of practical knowledge, there was an equal dose of ritual. A fever might be treated with willow bark, or by sleeping with an iron nail under your tongue and saying 3 pater nosters backwards at midnight. No line between the physical and the magical. Just a blend, layered like thick fog. And as you watch the healer pack a mixture of crushed clove and wine-soaked linen into the patient's wound, you wonder, how much of it is real? How much is belief? Does it matter if the result is the same? So you ask yourself, if medicine is half earth and half enchantment, what part of it is truly healing you? So, what part of it is truly healing you? Maybe the answer isn't in the jar or the prayer, but in the sky above your head. You feel your body moving upward now, slowly climbing a narrow spiral of worn stone steps. Your palm brushes the damp curve of the tower wall. Each step echoes, a hollow thud softened by centuries. You finally reach the summit and the air shifts. Cooler, thinner, scented faintly with wax and night air. The room opens into an observatory, circular and exposed to the heavens. Here, medicine turns its face skyward. The physician here doesn't reach for herbs. He reaches for the stars. He sits hunched over a polished oak table, parchment unfurled like a map of the divine. Quill in hand, he traces the position of Saturn and Mars, muttering under his breath. Beside him, a brass astrolabe gleaming in candlelight, its delicate arms pointing to answers that lie not in the body, but in the cosmos. You step closer and feel the cold breath of night pressing through the open arches. Outside, the stars burn quietly, icy white pinpricks against a black velvet sky. And here, in this chamber of slow breath and slower ink, you begin to understand something strange. In the medieval world, the heavens weren't just decoration, they were diagnosis. The stars weren't faraway suns, they were symbols, signs, guides. Each person was born under a constellation that left a cosmic fingerprint on their blood, bones, and temperament. Are you melancholic? Then Saturn likely hovered near your birth. Prone to fever and rash action. Mars, no doubt. Treatment had to align not just with your symptoms, but with the alignment of the heavens themselves. You sit across from the physician as he taps a point on your natal chart, his fingertip landing on Virgo in the 5th house. His face is calm, contemplative. No rush here. He tells you that surgery today would be unwise. The moon is in Gemini, and thus the hands are weak. Better to wait until the waxing crescent passes into Leo. that will bring strength, clarity, precision. This isn't superstition, not to him. It's timing. Like a farmer watching the seasons, he watches the sky. He plans his leeches, his bleedings, his herb mixtures based not only on humours, but on orbits. Imagine trying to navigate a world of chaos, disease, death, where your friends die from coughs and childbirth. Wouldn't it feel good, comforting even, to believe the stars were watching you, that they held a script written before your first breath? You glance down at a thick book beside him, Liber Planetis, filled with charts, coloured inks, and looping Latin. You recognize symbols: Aries, Scorpio, Aquarius, each paired with parts of the body. Aries rules the head, Libra, the kidneys. The body isn't just a machine, it's a constellation in human form. And just like the planets move in cycles, so too does health. A fever peaks and fades like a moon. A wound festers and drains like the tide. The stars above reflect the flesh below. Still, you wonder, what if the stars are only symbols? Useful, yes, but not divine. What if medicine doesn't flow from constellations, but from careful eyes and curious hands? You look up one more time, and the stars seem to blink, like distant candles in a room far larger than this one. And the question forms, quiet but firm. What if the stars were never fate, but simply a guidepost on the road to something more real? So, what if the stars were never fate, but simply a guidepost? Let's now descend from the heavens and step into something much more grounded. Your veins. You stand inside a wooden chamber, the kind that always smells like wet wool and boiled linen. There's a single window, small and high, letting in a narrow blade of daylight that slices across a wooden bench. And there, on that bench, sits a man, pale, sweating, his sleeve rolled up to reveal a trembling arm. 2 fingers pinch the crook of his elbow while another man, a barber surgeon in a stained apron, tightens a strip of cloth just above it. You're close enough to hear the slow murmur between them. No prayers this time, no stargazing, just whispers of balance. The humours must be corrected. Too much blood. Mars is strong this week. It's matter of fact, almost casual, as if they're not about to intentionally cut this man open. And yet, they are. The physician selects his knife, not the largest, but one with a narrow blade, clean and cold. You hear the metal ring faintly against the stone as it leaves the bowl. There's no rush. The procedure has been practiced for centuries. Galen swore by it. Avicenna catalogued it. Even Hippocrates had his own rules. Because in this world, your body is a balance of 4 fluids: blood, yellow bile, black bile, and phlegm. Sickness. It comes when those get stirred up or swell beyond their proper measure. Headache. Too much blood. Fever. Definitely too much blood. Melancholy. That's black bile, but you might still be bled just to be sure. You can smell the sharpness of iron now. Feel the tension in the room. Thick, hushed, anticipatory. The surgeon pricks the skin, and a thin line of red curls downward. It catches the light, then flows faster. The patient flinches but does not scream. This is expected. It's a treatment. You keep repeating that to yourself. Treatment. Beside him sits a small bowl. The blood pours into it in slow pulses, rhythmic, inevitable. The healer watches closely, not just the colour and thickness, but the amount. He doesn't want too much, but enough to release the bad vapours. And when it's done, he presses a poultice of moss and vinegar over the wound, binding it with a strip of linen. You shiver, not from cold, but from the ghost of empathy. Your fingers twitch. Your inner elbow itches. You understand now why some fainted not from blood loss, but from watching. And then come the leeches. A woman enters carrying a jar. Inside, a handful of glossy black creatures swirl lazily in the water. She tips the jar gently, and one by one, they are placed onto another patient's skin. You hear a soft pop as the first one latches. It wriggles slightly, settles in, and begins to drink. Unlike the blade, the leech works slowly, patiently, and in a strange way, it seems gentler, more organic. These creatures were collected from marshes, rivers, sometimes even sold by children who earned coins for each full jar. They were prized, sometimes stolen. Royal physicians swore by them. Monasteries had whole leech gardens. And here's the strangest part. It wasn't always nonsense. In some cases, bloodletting could reduce blood pressure or local swelling. Leeches secreted hirudin, an anticoagulant, long before that word even existed. So yes, sometimes these practices helped, but often they didn't. Sometimes patients weakened. Sometimes they died. Sometimes already fragile bodies couldn't recover from losing half a litre of blood. The cure became the cause. And yet the practice endured for centuries. Why? Because the theory was elegant. Because doctors feared doing nothing. Because tradition echoed louder than evidence. And maybe because people wanted to believe that letting something out would take the sickness with it. So now you ask, if bleeding often harmed more than it healed, why did it remain one of the cornerstones of medieval medicine? So, if bloodletting often caused more harm than good, why did it survive for centuries? To answer that, you need to step inside a different kind of chamber, one not filled with leeches or knives, but with ink, breath, and rising questions. You walk through the arched gate of a medieval university, and the world around you shifts. Gone are the herbs and the horoscopes. Here, you find echoing hallways lined with frescoes and worn stone steps that creak under the weight of centuries. The walls breathe dust and ambition. The air tastes of old parchment and sweat, thickened by chalk dust and candle smoke. Somewhere down the hall, someone sneezes into a sleeve, and someone else laughs a little too loudly before falling back into tense Latin murmurs. You push open the oak doors of a lecture hall. Rows of students, young men in robes, faces half-shadowed beneath linen caps, sit hunched at benches with goose-feather quills poised over vellum. The room is cramped and warm. You squeeze into a seat at the back, feel the bench groan under your weight. The scent here is unmistakable. Oiled wood, ink, tallow, and unwashed wool. The perfume of knowledge. At the front of the room stands a master physician. His beard is greying, and his fingers twitch as he speaks, tracing invisible diagrams through the air. Today's lecture is on the writings of Galen. Yes, again. His words, dictated in Greek centuries earlier, are still law in this room. Students copy feverishly, even when the logic cracks or conflicts. Because Galen was the system. He named the humours. He dissected apes and called it human anatomy. He was revered not because he was always right, but because he had tried to explain everything. And in a world longing for structure, explanation was gold. But something is shifting. You watch a student, no older than 20, raise his hand, hesitant. The master frowns but nods. The boy asks softly if pus is always good. Galen said it was laudable pus, the sign of healing. But the student had seen a man die, drenched in it. The room stills. Quills pause. The silence hangs heavy like wet linen. And the physician hesitates, just for a moment. Then he clears his throat and continues. But the seed has been planted. After class, you follow the students into the courtyard, where they debate among the boxwood hedges. You hear the names of Hippocrates, Avicenna, Aristotle, and in whispers, names like Mondino De Luzzi, and Taddeo Alderotti. Names not yet canon, but rising. These men are starting to dissect human corpses, illegally sometimes, quietly often. And what they see is challenging the stars, the saints, and even Galen. You sneak into one of those private dissections. The smell hits first, sour and thick, soaked into linen and wood. A body lies on a stone slab, candlelight flickering over greyed skin. The physician cuts with steady hands, naming muscles, mapping nerves. He says nothing of humours today. Only fibres, vessels, chambers. The body begins to look less like a battlefield of spirits, and more like a mechanism, like a machine. This isn't magic. It's not even faith. It's observation, testing, drawing, measuring. What bleeds, what clots, what folds, what fails. Every incision pulls the world a little further from mystery and closer to pattern. You step outside again, and the breeze feels different now, cooler, sharper, as if the air itself is learning to think. And you wonder, what if the body isn't a sack of mystic fluids or a temple of divine punishment? What if it's a system with rules and reasons waiting to be discovered? So, what if the body is not an enchanted sack of fluids, but a machine with reasons, patterns, systems? You won't find your answer on a battlefield or in a church. This time, you'll need to look in the margins of a book. You're seated in a quiet chamber, lit by a high, narrow window. Dust floats lazily in the golden afternoon light. The scent here is older than ink, aged leather, beeswax, and the dry, almost smoky perfume of old parchment. Before you lies a thick manuscript, its cover worn smooth by centuries of careful fingers. Its pages are vellum, soft, off-white, and slightly translucent, curled ever so slightly at the corners. As you reach forward and brush your fingertips over the surface, you feel its quiet weight. A weight not of mass, but of memory. This is a medical treatise, one of many. You're in a monastic library, or perhaps a university scriptorium. It hardly matters, because the ritual is the same. Eye scanning, quill scratching, candle flickering. The young scholar next to you, his fingers stained black from ink, leans over his copy, copying line after line from a manuscript written generations before he was born. Galen, again. Always Galen. But something's different now. In the margins of his page, he pauses. He doesn't just write, he questions. His pen wavers, then loops a tiny mark beside a sentence on digestion. He's seen something else in his studies, something that doesn't quite match. Maybe it was in a body he helped dissect last winter. Maybe it was in a letter from a colleague in Bologna. Either way, he's not just copying anymore. He's thinking. And that is new. You flip through the manuscript and see illuminations, tiny drawings of internal organs, sketched with delicate strokes and labelled in Latin. A red thread weaves through the veins. A tiny knife symbol marks the edge of a rib. The liver is oversized. Galen believed it was the source of blood and passion. But someone, centuries later, has written a soft correction in the margin. Videtur in autopsia, minor esse. Seen in autopsy to be smaller. It's not defiance, it's observation. And it changes everything. In another volume, you find translations. Greek turned into Arabic, Arabic into Latin. You recognize names, Avicenna, Ibn al-Nafis, Rhazes. These aren't just European ideas anymore. Medicine is becoming a conversation, a dialogue passed hand to hand across borders, across languages, across beliefs. Baghdad speaks to Bologna, Cordoba to Cambridge. And the more that's read, the more the questions begin to spread. You see it in the footnotes. Scholars wondering whether puas is always laudable, whether bones regenerate, whether women's wombs really wander. You read not only what's preserved, but what's challenged. The act of reading is no longer obedience, it's inquiry. There's power in that, because once you begin to question one part of the system, the others begin to shift too. Maybe disease isn't always divine punishment. Maybe bleeding isn't always the cure. Maybe Galen didn't see everything, and maybe that's okay. You watch a student close his book and lean back. He's exhausted, yes, but alert. There's ink on his hands and sweat under his collar, but in his eyes, there's fire. Not mystical fire, intellectual fire, the kind that turns pages into torches. Now you ask yourself, if the ink in these books can burn through dogma, can mere words, written in the quiet, really change the course of medicine, of history, of lives? So, can words on fragile parchment truly alter the course of lives? If you're ready to find out, you'll need to leave the quiet of the scriptorium behind and step into a colder, more tangible world. A world where bodies are open not for belief, but for understanding. You're standing at the edge of a long wooden table. On it lies a skeleton, real, complete, yellowed slightly with age. Each rib is precisely aligned, each finger bone curled just slightly inward, like it still remembers holding a quill or a prayer bead. The air is sharp with the scent of iron tools and something fainter. Musty fabric, dried blood, and smoke from oil lamps that gutter against the chill. This isn't a battlefield. It's a teaching room for surgeons. Around the skeleton are trays, bronze forceps, curved knives, probes that gleam under the low light. The instruments aren't elegant. They're blunt, practical, handled with thick fingers and sharper minds. You pick one up. It's heavier than you expected. Cool and impersonal, yet filled with implication. It's not a tool of superstition. It's a question made of metal. A man in his middle years leans over the skeleton. His face is lined, his mouth pressed into concentration. He doesn't mutter blessings. He doesn't consult a chart of the stars. He places his hand on the ribcage and begins to speak, not to the dead, but to the apprentices standing in a semicircle around him. You among them. This, he says, pointing with the edge of a curved blade, is where breath turns. Here is where the lungs pull air, and here where the heart pushes blood. You watch as he guides a slender rod through the trachea, into the lungs. You hear the scraping of bone beneath steel, the hushed breath of students leaning forward. No candles flicker, no prayers are said. This is science, or at least its cautious beginning. A student lifts a hand. "But master," he asks, voice dry from the cold. "Galen said the septum has holes, for the blood to pass between the ventricles." The surgeon pauses. He looks down at the open chest and shakes his head. "It has no holes," he replies. "Not in man, at least. Galen worked with apes." The students murmur. That single sentence weighs more than scripture. A challenge to centuries of knowledge. But it's not rebellion, it's discovery. And so begins a slow, careful process. You see students sketch what they observe. Their drawings are crude, but earnest. Muscles are labeled, arteries mapped. They begin to test how deep a wound must go before it cripples movement. They study how bones mend. They weigh organs after removal. These aren't monks in scriptoria. These are investigators with scalpels. You walk to the back wall where partial skeletons hang, spines like rows of ivory coins, pelvises resting in wooden trays. You trace your finger along the smooth ridge of a femur and imagine the person who once limped on it. These bones were once protected by belief. Now they are being unwrapped, piece by piece. And the tools, they evolve too. You see tweezers designed to extract arrows, hooks for probing behind the eye, saws for removing infected limbs. Not all instruments are new, but the intent behind them shifts. They're not used with rituals, they're used with precision, but it's not without tension. Outside this room, dissections are still controversial. In many cities, they require papal permission. Some corpses are stolen from graves. Others are offered by the condemned. You begin to feel the weight of each decision. What knowledge is worth this price? And so you stand there, fingers faintly tingling from the cold, ears filled with the rasp of metal against bone, and ask yourself, if the body can be read like a map, how far can you go before crossing a line the world is not yet ready to erase? So, how far can you go before crossing a line the world isn't ready to erase? Turns out, not far. Because just as medicine begins to inch its way into logic and observation, something vast and black crashes through the door. Something that doesn't care about anatomy charts or careful incisions. You call it plague, but back then you would have called it divine punishment, or worse, something without a name. Now imagine the air, not clean, not sharp, but swollen with rot, like spoiled meat left in a rain barrel. You're walking down a narrow cobbled street. It curves slightly, but every turn looks the same. Shutters nailed shut, red crosses smeared on doors, straw mats burned in the gutters. You pull a cloth across your face, soaked in vinegar and rosemary. It doesn't help. The stench curls through anyway, sour, animal, human. You step over a black mound in the alley. It moves. It's a man, still breathing but barely. His face is slick with sweat. Buboes swell on his neck like overripe fruit. His lips twitch, trying to form words, but nothing comes. You don't speak either. What could you possibly say? You pass a cart piled high with bodies. A woman in a stained hood rings a bell ahead of it. One clang, then another. That's the sound of clearance, of silence. You reach the physician's house. Inside it's chaos. Not loud, but thick. A boy lies on the table, eyes open, but not seeing. A woman sobs in the corner, her hands bloodied, not from injury, but from scratching prayers into the walls. The physician moves between them with practiced hands and hollow eyes. You see his tools, some familiar. Compresses, tinctures, a jar of camphor. Others, less so. A burning iron, a whip, a relic tied to a splinter of wood said to come from the cross of Christ. He doesn't look like a scientist. He looks like a priest, or a butcher, maybe both. You try to understand what he's doing. He bleeds one patient. He lays herbs across another. He waves incense. He whispers Latin. Then, in the next room, he drills a hole in a woman's skull, trepanation, to release the evil air. You back away. Outside, children chase pigeons with sticks. They laugh. The sun still shines. But the disease moves faster than laughter, faster than light, and it doesn't care who you are. Nobles, beggars, monks, mothers, gone, in days. Whole towns vanish, fields rot. Rats become messengers of death. And behind all of it, fear. Thick, clinging, irrational fear. People pray more. Flagellants whip themselves in public squares. Some accuse Jews and lepers. Others burn suspected witches. More die from that than from the fever. You read reports later. Some physicians left their cities. Others locked their doors and experimented in silence. And still others leaned deeper into ritual, into magic. Because here's the unbearable truth. Science, for all its scalpels and skepticism, had no answers, no cure, no pattern, nothing. So what do you cling to when your world ends? Anything. A carved charm, a whispered spell, a drop of holy water, an amulet filled with dried toad skin, a book of spells, a bone. And that's when you realize, when everything rational crumbles, when the body breaks and the stars go quiet, Belief doesn't vanish, it multiplies. And so you wonder, even in the face of disaster, when magic fails and logic collapses, why did belief in the invisible only grow stronger? So, why did belief in the invisible only grow stronger, even as death spread like smoke through the streets? Maybe because for most people, belief was all they ever had. And to understand that, you need to leave the city behind, step past the walls, through the mud, and into the quiet breath of the countryside. You find yourself standing at the edge of a clearing. The trees here whisper differently, low, tired, like they've watched too many winters come and go. A narrow footpath leads you to a cottage that leans ever so slightly, as though it's been listening in on its own roof for decades. Moss clings to the stones. Chickens wander without urgency. The air smells sharp with thyme and yarrow and something faintly burned, maybe mugwort. Inside, you hear the creak of wood and the soft clatter of a pestle against stone. A woman, older than you can guess, moves between shelves lined with clay pots and dried bundles of herbs. Her fingers are stained green, her eyes are grey, and the way she glances up at you, quiet, measured, unsurprised, makes you feel like she's seen through time. You sit. She doesn't ask what's wrong. She begins with water, boiled with nettle and a sliver of bark. She stirs it with a carved stick, muttering low words, not Latin, but older. A village dialect, half memory, half melody. She presses her palm to your forehead. Her skin is warm, and her touch is calm. There are no tools here, no diagrams, no theories of humours or astrology, only knowledge passed hand to hand, mother to daughter, season to season. And somehow, it works. People come from miles away to see her, for fevers, rashes, childbirth, nightmares. They bring eggs, bread, sometimes nothing but a whisper of thanks. And they believe in her, because she listens, because she helps. But not everyone sees her that way. You step back into the road, and a rider passes you, a man in fine robes with a university seal stitched into his cloak. His boots shine. His hands are clean. He speaks of ratio, of scientia. He dismisses wise women as relics, worse, as threats. In the cities, men like him are writing laws, regulating who may call themselves physician, licensing medicine, guarding knowledge. To him, she's a danger, a shadow, a superstition. And yet, you've seen both. The surgeon with his blades, and the woman with her balm. The chart of the stars, and the prayer whispered into a spoon of honey. And you can't help but notice, for all the distrust, their shelves carry the same herbs. Their eyes scan the same bodies. They both try, and fail, and try again. You remember how the official physicians laughed at charms and chants, but you also remember how they panicked when their books offered no answers, how some came in secret, hooded to her door. So where is the line? You walk through the twilight, the air cooling around your shoulders, the sky dipped in rose and smoke. Somewhere behind you she begins to sing, a lullaby, maybe a charm. You can't tell any more. And now you ask, if both healer and scholar touch the same leaf, where exactly is the boundary between science and faith, between knowledge and knowing? So, if the line between science and faith blurs in the hands of a village healer, what happens when curiosity gains tools? When belief meets fire and glass? To answer that, you must step into a room where shadows flicker across copper stills and glass bubbles with possibility. You're inside a chamber unlike any you've seen before. It isn't a chapel nor a hall of learning, and yet it contains both reverence and theory. It's warmer here, hot even. The air shimmers slightly from a brazier crackling in the corner. Flames dance beneath crucibles. Glass flasks stretch like soap bubbles, suspended in iron clamps. Thin trails of smoke curl from vents and beakers, fragrant and stinging all at once. Sulphur, dried mint, maybe scorched beeswax. This is an alchemist's lab. The man before you doesn't wear a physician's robe or a monk's habit. His tunic is soot-streaked, his fingers browned from contact with mercury, lead, copper salts. His beard is singed unevenly, as if he leans too far into the flame when adjusting his mixtures. And yet, his eyes are clear, focused, alive with purpose. You watch as he drops a white powder into a boiling vessel. It fizzes, hisses, blooms orange for an instant, then settles. He notes the change with a scratch of his quill in a leather-bound notebook, filled not with charms or prayers, but with ratios, temperatures, diagrams. He speaks as he works. This, he says, nodding to the fizzing flask, may draw the essence of the herb without corrupting it. His voice is gravelly, almost hoarse from years of inhaling things no one should inhale. Not a tincture, not superstition, but the spirit of the substance itself. It sounds like magic, but it's not quite. Alchemy, in your time here, isn't just about turning lead into gold. It's about transformation, of matter, of illness, of understanding. The alchemists of the Middle Ages were not all charlatans or dreamers. Some were deeply empirical. They catalogued reactions. They recorded failures. They tested combinations of plants and minerals in ways that no monastery ever dared. You pick up a vial, tiny, sealed with wax, holding a pale green fluid that shimmers faintly when shaken. On the shelf beside it is a powder labeled antimonium and a bottle of distilled rosemary. One for the bowels, one for the blood. Maybe. It's not certain yet. That's the point. Because here, unlike in the universities, doubt isn't punished. It's fuel. Alchemists began to create early forms of ethanol, used for cleaning wounds. They isolated acids. They experimented with opium. They worked with saltpeter, camphor, copper sulfate. They burned and mixed and waited. And over time, they began to create something closer to medicine. Real medicine. You hear stories of alchemists who provided compounds to royal physicians, of powders that reduced swelling, of salves that soothed ulcers. Some claimed miracles. Others promised nothing but effort. Still, not everyone approved. The church often viewed alchemy with suspicion, sometimes tolerating, sometimes condemning. The universities dismissed them as undisciplined. But in times of plague, poison, or pain, people came anyway. Because these strange men, with their glass and flame, often had something no one else did. A new idea, that healing might come not from above, not from within, but from the very materials of the world itself. You lean closer to a stack of scrolls on a wooden crate. You see strange symbols, yes, but also careful observations. Notes about dosage, side effects, preparation time. It's messy, experimental, risky, and completely different from the solemn certainty of Galen or Avicenna. So you wonder, if magic was belief without evidence, and medicine was theory without proof, could alchemy, with its fire and failure and questions, be the hidden bridge between enchantment and empiricism, between the mystic and the measurable? So, could alchemy truly become a bridge between magic and method? Maybe. But as men lit their fires and peered through flasks, others, quieter, humbler, were practicing medicine in kitchens, gardens, and back rooms, and most of them were women. Now imagine this. You're standing in a cottage near the forest's edge. It's dusk. Light filters in through small diamond-shaped panes, casting amber across a wooden floor. worn smooth by generations of footsteps. The scent in the air is rich and layered. Rosemary, thyme, maybe dried orange peel left on the hearth. A black pot simmers quietly near the fire. You hear it bubble, low and steady, like a heartbeat. You step inside. She turns slowly. Her sleeves are rolled up, hands stained with earth and juice from crushed leaves. A line of herbs hangs drying above her head. Yarrow, mugwort, lavender. A child lies on the table nearby, his ankle wrapped in a poultice of mashed roots and honey. A man, perhaps her husband, or just a grateful neighbor, sits against the wall, breathing shallowly. She presses a cloth to his forehead and hums something that isn't quite a song. And there, on a shelf beside the fire, sit the tools of her practice. Not scalpels or scrolls, but bundles of dried flowers, carved wooden spoons, handwritten notes in the margins of an old psalter. Maybe she can't read Latin, but she knows when a leaf bruises sweet or bitter. She knows which bark brings sleep and which will still a bleeding wound. She's a healer. And yet, outside the whispers grow. The priest saw a raven on her roof. A child who died last winter drank her tea. They say she walks through the cemetery at dusk, collects bones, speaks to herself. Someone recalls her great-grandmother was tried once. Someone else swears they saw a shadow near her window at midnight. She's not just a healer anymore. She's dangerous, because in this time, in many parts of Europe, knowledge in the hands of a woman is suspicion, and care, when it comes without permission, is rebellion. No degree, no oath, no guild, just experience, and that's what makes her frightening. You see it again and again. In England, women barred from university. In France, midwives arrested for unsanctioned medicine. In Germany, the Hexenhammer, a book that says the female body is a gateway for the devil. And in towns where the harvest fails or illness spreads, someone must be blamed. And she's there, always nearby, always helping, always vulnerable. You sit beside her as she cuts fresh comfrey leaves. Her hands move without thought. There's comfort in her rhythm, not mysticism, not menace, just habit and care. She looks tired, not afraid, just used to watching people look away when she walks past. But you've seen her save lives. So you ask yourself, why her? Why were women, with knowledge passed through generations, with fingers that healed and voices that calmed, so often cast as witches? Why is it that the same skill that made them vital also made them targets? So, why were women with healing hands the ones most often burned? Maybe because the world was changing, and power doesn't like to be shared. But if the kitchen was a place of hidden medicine, the hall you're standing in now is where medicine begins to demand doors and locks. You step into a vaulted chamber lit by tall, narrow windows. The walls are lined with dark wood, the ceiling ribbed like the inside of a cathedral. It smells of wax, parchment, and something sharper, like starched linen soaked in ink. The floor beneath you clicks softly with each step, echoing between the stone columns. This is the hall of a guild. And you're here to listen. A group of men, cloaked in black and crimson, gather around a heavy table. Their robes rustle like dry leaves, their voices low, tight. They are physicians, not in name alone, but by examination, lineage, and license. You recognize their tone instantly. It's the sound of authority deciding what counts. On the table lie scrolls, seals, records, signatures pressed into wax, and most importantly, lists, names approved, names denied, standards, regulations, definitions of who may call themselves medicus and who may not. A young man stands before them, sweating slightly. his hands clenched behind his back. He recites from memory, Latin definitions, anatomical terms, treatments for fevers. They nod. One frowns, another writes. This is no longer a world of wandering healers and whispered prayers. This is the beginning of professionalization. Medicine is becoming exclusive. You walk along the edge of the room and glance at the documents pinned on the wall. Laws from the king, edicts from the city council, even letters from the church. All declare the same thing. Unauthorized healing will no longer be tolerated. Surgery must be taught. Pharmacy must be supervised. Midwives must register. Books must be approved. And the consequences: fines, banishment, prison. Sometimes worse. Outside this hall, the world remains messy. People still visit the herbalist down the lane. They still trust the old widow who sees illnesses in the eyes. But here, within these carved walls, medicine is tightening its grip. There are benefits. The charlatan with his glowing powder is gone. The man who sold crushed brick as a cure for plague is jailed. Infection begins to be understood. New texts, real, careful, clinical, are being written. Apprentices now learn from masters, not rumour. Exams matter. The sick begin to be seen as patients, not sinners or symbols. But something else is lost. You notice it in the young man as he leaves. He passed his exam, but his shoulders sag. He knows the rules now, but he looks smaller, less certain. The patient is no longer a neighbour, a friend, a soul in need. They're becoming a case, a symptom, a problem to solve. You glance at the charter being signed. It's beautiful, ornate lettering, gold trim. It gleams in the candlelight like a holy relic. But its purpose is simple: to protect the profession. And you wonder, what happens when medicine starts protecting itself more than the people it was meant to serve? What if the walls that keep out fraud also keep out compassion? So, can strict control of knowledge preserve medicine without sacrificing its soul? Maybe. But to see what happens when knowledge steps out of shadow and into spectacle, you'll have to climb the creaking stairs of a building that smells faintly of chalk, smoke, and something much more primal. You walk into an anatomical theatre. It's circular, wooden, tiered like an arena. The benches rise steeply around a central table. No, a stage. You hear the soft rustle of fabric as people settle into their seats. Robes brushing knees, boots clunking softly on wood. Whispers coil in the air, questions, bets, rumours. At the centre of it all is the body, still, pale, draped modestly in linen, awaiting the first incision. You take your place along the railing. From up here, the light from high windows spills in like filtered judgment. There's no hiding. The room is bright, sterile in intention, though not in practice. The scent hangs around you, faint alcohol, old leather, and something underneath, iron-rich and inevitable. Then a man in a dark robe steps forward. He doesn't bow, doesn't preach. He announces the age, sex, and cause of death. His assistant peels back the linen with steady hands. You hear a gasp. Someone below sees something they've never seen before. A lung, a rib, a dark bloom of a liver nestled beneath the curve of the diaphragm. And now, you watch. The instructor narrates with clarity and pace. He points with a thin rod, identifying structures in Latin and vernacular alike. Hepa, the liver, the furnace of the body, according to Galen. But note, he prods the edge gently, not as large as once claimed. Students scribble, some sketch, some simply stare. You lean forward. There's no blood now. The cadaver is preserved, but your senses still stir. The faint tang of formaldehyde mingles with the distant clatter of hooves outside. the smell of wax from the tallow candles, the quiet intake of breath as the instructor gently lifts the intestines, folding them aside like thick, slick rope to reveal the kidneys beneath. For the first time, knowledge isn't just read, it's seen, touched, public, and not everyone watching is a student. Merchants attend these lessons, nobles, curious laypeople, even local clergy. Some look pale, some fascinated, a few faint, but no one leaves. Because what happens here changes something deeper than anatomy. It changes belief. The body is no longer a vessel of mystery. It's a map, an object, a structure. You hear it in the murmurs. So that's where the spirit resides? He said nothing of humours. It doesn't match the drawings. You glance around and see the shift beginning, not just among the students, but in the crowd itself. Wonder, discomfort, awe. Not everyone is ready for it, because for some it feels sacred. For others, it feels like desecration. And still, the knife continues. The hand opens the skull. The instructor names the dura mater, traces the ventricles. One woman covers her mouth, another clutches her pendant, but no one turns away. You begin to understand. This is more than medicine. It's theatre, it's revelation, it's revolution. And now you ask yourself, when the body becomes a book read aloud before a crowd, how do people really react when the pages finally turn? So, how does a crowd react when the body is unwrapped like a book? With awe, with fear, with fascination. But the real test of knowledge doesn't happen in a clean amphitheatre with candlelight and calm. No, it happens in chaos, in heat, in blood. And right now, you're standing in the middle of it. You're on a battlefield. The smoke clings low to the ground like a second skin. It stings your eyes and carries with it the bitter scent of sulfur, sweat, and scorched wool. You can barely hear yourself think over the layered roar of clashing steel, whinnying horses and men, some shouting orders, others screaming. The grass beneath your boots is no longer green, but a slick brown-red trampled flat by boots and bodies. And in the middle of it all, there's a tent. You duck inside and feel the heat shift. It's close, thick with the smell of blood and boiled linen. The canvas glows with filtered light, the shadows moving with every scream outside. On a low table lies a man, moaning, barely conscious. His leg, what's left of it, is a ruined mess of bone and cloth. A surgeon kneels beside him, sleeves rolled, face damp, eyes focused. This isn't the surgeon from the Guildhall. No robe, no Latin, just vast, brutal knowledge. You watch as he ties a strip of cloth around the thigh, pulling hard. He doesn't wait for permission. He doesn't wait for prayer. He grabs his knife, rust-colored from too many previous uses, and begins to cut. The man thrashes. 2 assistants hold him down. You smell the metallic rush of open blood. Hear the wet rip of tissue. The surgeon works fast. He has to. There are 10 more outside waiting. He saws through the bone with a tool that looks more like a carpenter's than a doctor's. The rasping sound will stay with you longer than any scream. Then, he cauterizes. Iron to fire. Fire to flesh. The hiss is violent. The body goes still. He doesn't stop to mourn. He doesn't even look up. He wraps what's left with linen soaked in wine, grabs the next patient, and starts again. And yet, despite the horror, you notice something else. Precision, pattern, practice. You glance at a tray beside him. Pliers, shears, scalpels, needles curved like question marks. None of them gleam. They're dulled by use, dulled by time. But they work. And the man using them, he knows what each one does and what it doesn't. He's learned to recognize when a wound will fester, when it needs to be drained, when it can be closed, when there's no point trying. He knows when to save the limb and when to take it before the rot climbs higher. And he writes, between cases, in a stained notebook, tucked into a leather pouch, he scribbles notes. What worked, what didn't. He's building something. An understanding born not from books, but from survival. You hear him speak to his assistant, clamp deeper. If you don't crush the vessel, the man won't make it to morning. It's not cold, it's clarity. He isn't a butcher. He's a craftsman caught in a war, and the battlefield is his teacher. Later, you follow him back to a town. There, he trains others. He shows them how to clean wounds with boiled vinegar, how to shape a splint from willow bark, how to suture with catgut instead of thread. He shares what he's learned. The pain he's witnessed doesn't make him cruel. It makes him faster, wiser, humane in the strangest possible way. But people still whisper. Some call him brilliant. Others call him a monster, because to cut is still taboo. To touch what's beneath the skin is still unsettling. And you wonder, as the cries outside begin again, if cutting can save a life. Can surgery ever stop being seen as violence? Or will it always carry the shadow of pain even when it heals? So, can surgery evolve from horror into hope? Can steel and scar become something sacred? Perhaps. But before the scalpel can claim legitimacy, it must wrestle with something older, deeper, and far more resistant than infection. Belief. You're standing in a stone hall that echoes with every breath. It isn't a cathedral, but it carries the weight of judgment just the same. A raised platform dominates the front. Thick wooden benches curl around the chamber like ribs around a heart. Every seat is filled. Robes of wool and velvet, hoods drawn low, crosses clutched tightly, fingers twitch, voices hush. Because today, medicine is on trial. In the center stand two men. On the left, a physician. You recognize the signs. Trimmed beard, folded hands, a leather pouch bulging with instruments. He wears the dark mantle of a university guild. Around his neck hangs the symbol of his order, silver, simple, worn. On the right, a man robed in midnight blue. No crest, no badge. His staff is carved with symbols you've seen etched into door frames and whispered over fire pits. He carries no books, only presence. His gaze doesn't flicker, even under the gaze of the judge. This is no ordinary debate. It's a confrontation between two ways of seeing the world. The physician steps forward. His voice is firm, polished, controlled. He speaks of blood, bile, infection, air. He recites anatomy, speaks of experiments, cautions against superstition. The room nods. This is the age of reason. The body is not a mystery. It is a mechanism. Then the other man speaks. His voice is slower, not rehearsed, but rhythmic, like a tide. He tells the story of a boy who swallowed nails and lived, of dreams that warned of tumors, of herbs that grew only near graves and bloomed when death was close. He says healing is not just about the body, but the spirit, the land, the unseen, the unknown. The air thickens. The judge clears his throat. Are you healer or heretic? The physician steps forward again. He has no training, no examinations, no proof. He chants, he guesses, he risks lives. The mage smiles, just barely. And you, bleed them in winter, purge them in spring, and call it science. The crowd shifts, because both have saved lives, both have failed. The old woman in the second row was cured of fever by chant and willow bark. The boy in the front lost his father to a surgeon's error. Neither path is pure, neither is safe. You watch as a scroll is unrolled. Laws written to ban unsanctioned practice. Names of those fined, jailed, burned. You see fear in the mage's eyes now, but not retreat. He stood in storms before, and still, he stands. The judge raises a hand. Enough. Silence. You could hear a mouse walk across the beams. And then the question comes, not from the judge, but from a young girl seated near the back. Her voice is high, clear, unafraid. Can't both be true. Heads turn. No one answers. Because deep down, you feel it too. You've seen the surgeon's hands and the herbalist's heart. You've stood in candle-lit rooms where charts were drawn with both ink and intuition, where a diagnosis came from a pulse and a prayer. So now, as the judgment looms, you ask yourself, is the world really big enough for scalpels and symbols, for numbers and night dreams? Can reason and ritual ever share the same room? So, can reason and ritual share the same room? That question lingers in your thoughts like smoke in rafters. And to find the answer, you step into a place where ideas don't shout, but whisper, where the body isn't cut open, but read, line by line, like sacred scripture. You are in a university, but not like the grand polished temples of learning you might imagine. No marble halls, no polished brass. This is a place of clay and candle soot, of damp stone corridors and ink-stained benches. A cool draft brushes your ankles. The scent of beeswax, animal hide, and dusty vellum clings to the air. You hear the quiet sound of study. A dozen students, seated shoulder to shoulder at long wooden tables, pore over massive volumes. They copy text by hand. You watch the slow drag of a quill through thick black ink, careful, deliberate. One misstroke, and a sentence could turn to nonsense. The room is dim, lit by the trembling yellow of oil lamps. Shadows dance across faces furrowed in concentration. The master stands at the front. Not a preacher, not a performer. Just a man with ink on his cuffs and experience behind his eyes. He reads aloud. The words are from Hippocrates, on the nature of illness, the balance of humours, the importance of environment. Then Pliny, Galen, Avicenna, names spoken with reverence, almost as if invoking saints. These aren't just thinkers, they are pillars. And every student here is expected to memorize, recite, and eventually challenge. But not yet. You lean closer to one of the open books. The Latin is tight and looping, the margins filled with annotations in smaller hand. Someone has drawn a diagram, a lung, roughly sketched, labelled in Latin and Greek. Beside it, a note. Sanguis calidus, excessus ignis. Hot blood, excess fire. They're starting to question. That's the real shift. This isn't rote repetition anymore. It's method, structure. A young man whispers to another about a fever case and how Galen's remedy failed. They're not just absorbing. They're beginning to test. But progress isn't quick. The tools here are slow. Memory, ink, repetition. There are no models, no microscopes, no antiseptics. Only old texts, hard benches, and harder questions. But still, you feel it. A quiet revolution. Thought becoming discipline. You wander into the next room. An apprentice prepares a tincture while another recites anatomy from memory. A debate breaks out. Should one purge during a fever or wait for signs of imbalance? Voices rise and fall like waves, measured, respectful, firm. This isn't noise. It's refinement. Outside, medicine is still wild. Part trade, part trial, part prayer. But here, within these walls, it's trying to become something more, something professional. You sit beside a student tracing the lines of a diagram over and over again. He looks up, eyes tired but steady. To heal, he says softly, is to understand. Then he returns to his page. And you ask yourself, if knowledge is being learned, debated, standardized, then what truly defines a real physician? Is it the title, or the choice, to never stop asking why. So, what does it mean to be a real physician? Is it the robes, the texts, the discipline of thought? Or something older, more open, something that stretches beyond borders? To answer that, you leave the stone halls of Europe behind and follow the dusted rhythm of hooves across dry earth. You're on the Silk Road. The horizon shimmers with heat. The sky is wide, endless, painted in dusty pastels of ochre and pale blue. Wind picks up grains of sand that cling to your boots, your lips, your lashes. You've been walking with a caravan for days now. Merchants with dyed fabrics, perfumers with brass containers of myrrh and musk, scholars with satchels of scrolls and ink. And beside you, on a low-built camel with blue-wrapped reins, rides a man dressed in flowing robes of pale cotton. His turban is wound in indigo, his beard combed neatly. He carries no weapons, just a pouch of herbs and a book wrapped in oiled cloth. He is a physician of the East. You arrive together at an oasis town, half stone, half sand, all breath. The market hums with life. You smell cinnamon, frankincense, dried lemon. You hear languages you don't recognize: Arabic, Persian, Turkic, Sanskrit, woven together like the rugs on display. In the corner of a quiet courtyard, shaded by olive trees, the physician kneels beside a merchant's child. He examines her eyes, listens to her breath, feels her pulse, not at the wrist, but the neck, the ankle, the inner elbow. He mutters numbers beneath his breath, counting something unseen. Then, with calm hands, he mixes crushed fennel with honey and a chalky white powder from a lacquered box. You ask what it is. He answers softly, talc and anise, to cool the liver and ease the cough. You don't argue. Later, he shows you his books. They're bound in soft leather, the pages edged with gold. Inside, ink diagrams of internal organs, flowing Arabic script, references to Galen, Avicenna, Rhazes. You recognize the names, but the commentary is different, more holistic. Disease is not a curse, but an imbalance of heat and cold, wet and dry, blood and bile, spirit and breath. You point to a passage and he smiles. That is Kitab al-Kanun fi al-Tib, the canon of medicine. Avicenna, a prince of knowledge. You've heard of the canon back in Europe, but here it's alive. Read, debated, improved, translated into Syriac, then Arabic, and now Latin, slowly making its way across the Mediterranean, changing how European physicians think about the body, the mind, the soul. You sit with him beneath the stars that night, sipping a tea of mint and dried fig leaves. He tells you that in his city, hospitals have wards for different diseases, libraries, running water, gardens. That medicine is taught not just by masters, but by scholars of law, philosophy, and poetry. You listen, because here the lines between science, spirituality, and structure are not fought over. They are danced with. You remember the courts back in Paris, the judgment, the dividing line between physician and mystic. And now, here in this courtyard, there is no line. There is only knowledge, movement, exchange, and slowly that knowledge flows west. The spices, the remedies, the charts, the languages, words like elixir, syrup, naphtha, all born here, now whispered in European tongues. You realize Europe isn't discovering medicine. It's receiving it, translating it, sometimes even claiming it as its own. And as dawn colors the desert with blush and bronze, you wonder, if knowledge can cross deserts and seas, pass from tongue to tongue, hand to hand, then how does that change the very definition of healing? Does a cure belong to a culture or to the world? So, can healing transcend borders, born on caravan winds and cradled by curiosity? It can. But for that knowledge to truly endure, to leap beyond the tongues of traders and the lips of masters, it needs a vessel. Something that doesn't fade like breath or memory. And that vessel now rests in your hands. It's a book, not a scroll, not a manuscript copied by candlelight over aching weeks. A book, bound, inked, identical to 100 others. You smell it before you even open it. Fresh paper, a hint of oil from the press, iron from the ink. The scent of a revolution disguised as parchment. You're in Mainz, 1450s. The workshop is narrow but humming with life. Sunlight streams through small windows, casting golden grids on walls stained with ink. Wooden presses creak rhythmically, thump, shift, crank. Young apprentices wipe their hands on their aprons and shuffle trays of movable type like tiny metallic puzzle pieces. You hear them mumbling letter sequences under their breath, some in Latin, others in German, a few in Greek, and there, resting in a drying rack near the far window, De Medicina by Celsus, printed, massed, multiplied. You pick it up. The weight feels right, not too heavy, not too delicate. The Latin flows cleanly across the page, unmarred by smudges or inconsistencies. For the first time, you're holding a medical text that won't change from one copy to the next. What's printed here in Mainz today could be read in Venice by winter, Paris by spring, Constantinople next year. This is no longer secret knowledge passed from master to apprentice. It's a spark, and it's about to catch. You turn the pages and feel the shift. Illustrations, clear, woodcut depictions of bones, organs, tools, margins wide enough for notes. Text in a font that mimics the brushstroke, yet lacks the fatigue. You don't need to squint. You don't need to guess. The book wants to be read. Outside, you find a group gathered around a stall. A man reads aloud from a printed text on plague prevention. Another offers a bound volume of herbal remedies. A woman holds a newly printed psalter in one hand and a medical booklet in the other. Knowledge is bleeding from the elite into the everyday. Even healers begin to change. In taverns, barbers discuss printed diagrams of veins. In abbeys, monks debate whether the humours truly align with the elements. In universities, professors argue whether Galen should still be gospel, now that Avicenna's words share the same format, the same ink, the same permanence. You overhear a scholar scoff. If everyone can read the same book, who is the authority now? And that's the point. The press doesn't just distribute knowledge, it flattens it, levels it, gives the same weight to a monk's sermon as a surgeon's notes. A misprint becomes a myth, a clever annotation, canon. But medicine, it changes too. With each copy, fewer students rely on oral tradition, fewer mistakes in copying, fewer gaps between the cities, more debate, more questioning. The pace accelerates. Someone in Florence prints a treatise on the liver based on an Eastern diagram. Another in Prague critiques it in the margin. In Paris, that critique becomes the footnote to a new edition. And as you watch a young boy hand his father a slim, printed guide to childbirth, its cover stamped with a modest rose, you understand. This isn't just the rise of paper and ink. It's the birth of medicine as a conversation anyone can join. And now you ask yourself, if a book can travel farther than a teacher and reach ears that would never enter a university, can the printed page truly shift the course of healing? Can it change the soul of medicine itself? So, can the printed page reshape medicine itself? In the flicker of ink and press, something was indeed set in motion. But as words spread and questions deepened, another shift began, quieter, sharper, more defiant. A shift not written in books, but felt in the space between belief and proof. You're standing in a small examination chamber, colder than you expected. The walls are bare, no charms, no crucifixes, no herbs strung in corners. A young physician in a plain robe leans over a patient, his hands steady, eyes narrowed not in prayer, but in calculation. He doesn't murmur blessings. He doesn't glance at the moon. He listens. He presses 2 fingers to the man's wrist, counts silently, nods once. Then he takes notes in a leather-bound journal, meticulously, column by column. Pulse, temperature, diet, skin tone, stool consistency, patterns. You flip through pages of previous cases, burns, fevers, injuries, infections. Each one described not with fear or metaphor, but with observation. Measurable, comparable, repeatable. This is the new paradigm. You step out into the corridor of a hospital that barely resembles the smoky healing rooms of the past. Gone are the amulets over doorways. Gone the chants and alchemical riddles. Here, everything is function. Beds aligned, instruments boiled, schedules kept, records maintained. And the change isn't just in the rooms, it's in the language. Instead of imbalance of spirits, it's dehydration. Instead of divine retribution, it's infectious agent. Instead of fate, it's cause. You overhear a conversation between 2 students dissecting a cadaver under the supervision of an older professor. One asks why the liver is hardened. The other suggests diet, not sin. The professor neither blesses nor condemns. He simply instructs, observe. Always observe. And yet, the air is not free of tension, because outside the hospital walls, the world still clings to the old ways. You hear the whispers. That man heals without praying. He treats illness with cold tools and colder eyes. He doesn't even believe in the curse. You pass a baker's wife who refuses treatment for her son, choosing a village herbalist instead. The doctor doesn't speak to the soul, she says, only the body. And it stings, because for all its order and clarity, this new medicine is not yet warm. It doesn't comfort, it doesn't forgive. It demands understanding, but offers no myth, no magic to hold in shaking hands at midnight. You watch a physician leave a home where his patient has just died. He removes his gloves, he wipes his face, and he does not look to the sky. He writes a note, closes a journal, and moves on to the next house. The certainty of magic is fading, and in its place, method, repetition, doubt, precision. It is a cold dawn, but it is dawn nonetheless. So now, as you sit beside a young apprentice reciting symptoms from a list, not a scroll, not a charm, you ask, if healing becomes only what we can see, test, measure, does that make it stronger? Or does it leave something behind? Can reason truly defeat centuries of belief? Or will the shadows of superstition forever follow in its wake? So, can the printed word truly reshape the soul of medicine? Or does knowledge demand more than replication? It demands risk. That's the question tugging at your mind as you step into a dim laboratory thick with the tang of metal and boiled roots. The room is neither chapel nor lecture hall. It's something raw, closer to the truth, closer to uncertainty. You're in the 16th century now. The walls are stone, lined with shelves that groan under the weight of glass jars and iron flasks. Tables cluttered with mortars, tongs, and stained linens fill the space. There's a chill here, but it's not cold. It's anticipation. The air carries the scent of old parchment, rosemary, camphor, and copper dust. At the center of it all, a physician crouches beside a patient. He's not praying. He's not quoting Galen. He's watching. The patient breathes heavily, his skin slick with sweat. The physician presses a hand to his chest, then picks up a vial of pale green liquid, an infusion of wormwood, he notes aloud. This dose has been altered. Less basil, more vinegar. Different from the mixture administered yesterday. You watch as he scribbles in a worn ledger. Pulse slowed. Perspiration increased. No vomiting. Possibly stabilizing. This is not tradition. This is trial. You step closer and catch sight of other pages. Patient expired after second administration. Internal bleeding suspected. Possible misidentification of henbane instead of horehound. Note, smells stronger than normal. Retest herb. This is what experimentation looks like in its infancy. Messy, hesitant, brave. Another doctor walks in. Older, greyer. Eyes lined from years of skepticism. He mutters disapproval. You test on the poor, and still you claim science. But the younger one does not respond with anger. He simply points to the notes, the variables, the control groups. We learn because we look, he whispers, not because we believe. Still, nothing here is sterile. You see blood on the table edge, a burned cloth, a shattered jar swept into the corner, a pile of dried herbs that once promised a cure and now serve only as a reminder, but also progress. A fever once deemed divine punishment now lowers predictably with specific bark steeped for hours instead of days. A wound, cleaned with vinegar twice daily, resists putrefaction longer than with salt alone. There is no magic here, just patterns and pain. For every small success, there are many failures. You sit by the fire later that night, listening to two students debate. One insists medicine must be empirical, based solely on visible results. The other argues that the soul must be considered, that what you cannot weigh still weighs on the body. You look into the fire and wonder which of them will be remembered. Because here, in this room of smoke and ink and ache, science is being born, but not yet trusted. The world still calls it guesswork. Some call it arrogance. The patients call it hope. But even hope has a cost. You return to the doctor's ledger, now open on a fresh page. The ink is wet. The last entry reads, "Patient survived, marking day 1 of new tincture protocol. Repeating method tomorrow, no prayer offered." And then you realize, even in silence, this is a declaration, a step, a break, a risk. So now, as you breathe in the bitter scent of rosemary and rust, you ask, if every discovery is born from trial, and every trial from pain, then how can we claim knowledge is ever truly objective? If the cost of learning is written in blood, you stand at the threshold of a new era. Medicine transformed, a world shifting from whispered prayers to methodical inquiry. The air around you is crisp, alive with possibility, but also tinged with echoes of what once was. This moment is both an ending and a beginning. Imagine yourself on the steps of a university lecture hall, the dawn sun filtering through stained glass, casting vibrant patterns across stone floors, worn smooth by centuries of seekers. The scent of old books mingles with faint traces of herbs once gathered in the wild. Around you, scholars debate passionately, not about spells or charms, but about anatomy, physiology, and the curious workings of the human body. The days when sickness was seen as a curse from capricious spirits are fading. Instead, illness is observed, measured, documented. Physicians no longer rely solely on talismans or incantations, but turn to experiments, dissections, and data. The ancient texts of Hippocrates and Galen, once unquestioned, are examined critically, updated with discoveries from new worlds and cultures. You can hear the steady rhythm of progress, a heartbeat steadying after centuries of doubt. Hospitals are cleaner, instruments more precise, knowledge shared through printed pages that travel far and wide. women who were once branded witches are slowly recognized for their contributions to healing and midwifery, though prejudice still lingers like a shadow. Yet, the transformation is not without tension. Old beliefs cling like stubborn ivy on the walls of this new medicine. Folk healers, herbalists, and traditional wisdom persist alongside emerging scientific methods. The dialogue between faith and reason continues, a dynamic tension that pushes medicine forward while honoring its roots. As you breathe in the fresh air of this new dawn, you reflect on the journey, the winding path from magic to method, from superstition to science. The world you inhabit now owes its foundation to those who dared to question, to observe, to experiment despite fear and uncertainty. And you wonder quietly, how far have we really come from the days of whispered spells and shadowed fear? What echoes of those times still pulse beneath the surface of our modern understanding? Is there still a place for wonder in a world ruled by evidence? Or have we traded mystery for mastery forever? The story of medieval medicine is not just a tale of healing, but a mirror held up to our endless quest for truth, a dance between the known and the unknown, a legacy that shapes us still. And so, as the sun sets on this chapter, you take a deep breath, ready to step forward into the future, carrying the past with care